Hi, welcome back to this unemployment series. Now, if you've been following, by now you've understood how complex and dangerous unemployment is. In this video, I'll discuss what the government has done to address the unemployment problem. So when I say the government, I'm not just talking about Ruto's administration, but also I'll be referring to previous governments. My name is Susan Wanjiku. I'm the founder of Wanjikuseyeke, and here I discuss the relationship between economic development and governance so that you can understand, engage, and influence the matters that affect you and I. Welcome to Wanjikuseyeke. Now, whenever the government is trying to address the issue of unemployment, they could either address it from the demand side of unemployment or the supply side of unemployment. So let's begin with the supply side. Part of the reason for unemployment is a mismatch between the skills that the job seekers have and what the employers are looking for. So when we say the supply side, what I mean is, what are the government interventions that deal with the quality of the workforce? You, me, and anyone else who can be a job seeker. Now, there are two major things that affect the quality of the workforce. You need people to be healthy, and you also need people to have skills, whether that's in the form of education or in form of training. So number one is government interventions to address the health of the people. Now, when it comes to health, we're referring to nutrition, illness and disease, and drug and substance abuse. Now, in an ideal world, you shouldn't be working if you're unwell, and you should have access to treatment so that you can be able to go back to school or to go back to work. So one of the ways that the government of Kenya has addressed health-related concerns is by devolving health services to make sure that healthcare is accessible to more people across the counties. And they've also built more medical facilities within the years and sent more health workers to the counties. Obviously, devolving health hasn't come without challenges of its own, like when the national and county government are fighting because the national government hasn't disbursed money to the counties. Healthcare suffers because doctors end up striking, or now they end up focusing on their private consultations, which can be very expensive. So they don't even bother to show up to public health facilities because they're not even paid well, or they're not paid on time, or both. Now, to intervene on nutrition, the government's efforts have been to address hunger coming from either being unable to afford food or hunger due to drought and famine. So hunger can lead to malnutrition, stunted growth, and it also lowers your immunity. But also when you're hungry, you can barely focus or concentrate. And if you can't focus, it affects your productivity and performance, whether at work or at school. So to address nutrition, Moi's government had Maziwa ya Nyayo in the 80s, which was a program that supplied free milk to kids in school. So not only to make sure that the kids have something in their stomach, but also to increase enrollment in school, which it did. But the program was stopped because it was difficult to sustain it. So last year, the Senate made a similar proposal to reintroduce the program, but it was rejected by the MPs mainly because of budgetary concerns and that it will interfere with other school feeding programs. So an example of other school feeding programs is the Homegrown School Meals program and the Marufuku Kenya program, and others in partnership with NGOs and the government of Kenya to feed kids in schools, like Food for Education and Cup of Uji Foundation. So interventions to address nutrition are long-term interventions. Make sure kids are healthy so that they can be able to stay in school because of the implications it will have in the future. So health feeds into education. Now, there are other interventions designed to make food accessible, like food subsidies, like the Unga one, cash transfer programs, giving relief food, and taming inflation because it affects the cost of food. So remember, we're living at a time when millions of Kenyans are grappling with starvation, and those in the urban areas can't afford food. Now, number 2 is enhancing the quality of the workforce through education. Now, when it comes to education, the government has addressed it from 3 main fronts, which is making education affordable, the content of the curriculum, and ensuring there's adequate infrastructure. And for this, I'll mainly speak on the interventions touching on basic education, that's primary and secondary school. So first, to address making basic education more affordable, the government tried to implement a free primary education program in the 70s, but the government struggled to sustain it. Then the government of Kibaki reintroduced the free primary and partly free secondary education, which significantly increased enrollment in public schools. So for secondary education, I say partly because the government only covers the tuition fee, then the parents cover uniform and boarding fees in the case of boarding schools. But unfortunately, since the government doesn't cover all the costs, some kids drop out of school because they can't afford to pay for lunch or to buy uniforms, and those called into boarding school sometimes can't afford it. Like, you pass your KCPE, then you're called to a national boarding school, but a student can't transition to secondary school because the parents can't afford it. So if this is new to you, once the KCPE results are released every year, just pay attention to the news. Then requests for fee support for one student after another is what dominates the news. Then the government also puts a cap and a limit to the fees in public day and boarding schools, which is reviewed after a certain period. But these interventions designed to bring down the cost of education brought about new challenges, which brings me to my second point, government spending on infrastructure in education. Now, because more children are enrolling in school and more were transitioning from primary to secondary school, the existing facilities in public schools couldn't handle that pressure. That's why there's overcrowding in schools, sanitation issues, not enough teachers or classrooms or labs or dormitories, and other very important facilities. And some public schools are just in horrible condition. Now, about 2 years ago, there was a wave of strikes in public schools, and the students cited some of these things as the reasons for the strikes. So the government has had to increase what they spend on education to upgrade these schools. However, because the government has been unable to catch up, schools have been hiking fees and parents have been forced to cough up more in fees. Now, in 2016, the education sector reported that the government needed to construct 4,000 classrooms and 700 labs, dorms, and other facilities. And the need has become more urgent as they implement this new CBC curriculum. And that brings me to the third point, changing the curriculum. Now, since independence in 1963, the government has changed the curriculum thrice. I won't speak about the contents of the curriculum, but just keep in mind that each time the curriculum was changed, it was because the government and the employers felt that the school system produced half-baked graduates. That not only did the graduates have the skills needed by employers, but they also do not have the skills to create jobs for themselves. But something that I found to be ironical in some reports is that one criticism for the 844 system is that it's broad, expensive, and burdensome to pupils and parents. Does that sound familiar? The new CBC has faced similar criticism from teachers because they barely received training for the curriculum, and the parents also complained because they are required to put in a lot of time in helping the kids with their homework, plus the financial resources that are needed are a burden. So in addition to that, CBC is more technology oriented than the two previous curriculums, and because of this, it requires a significant investment to support the implementation of this curriculum, be it the classrooms, teachers, the devices, electricity connection in schools in rural areas, internet connection, etc. If it's not addressed, guess what? We are compromising on the quality of education, and we'll be back to square one where we changed the curriculum but didn't get the desired outcome. which is students of the CBC curriculum will still be thought of as half-baked, and as a result, unemployment will continue to persist. Another thing that the government has done is to provide training opportunities, especially for the people who don't and didn't meet the KCSE grade threshold that will get them into university. So for this, the government has been on a mission to promote, encourage, and fund technical and vocational training, which is an alternative to the traditional schooling system. So this training is offered through the technical vocational education training institutions, that's TVET, the National Industrial Training Authority, that's NITA, and the National Youth Service, NYS, among many others. So unfortunately, even though these institutions provide a second chance to the guys who didn't pass their KCSE for whatever reason, there's still a negative perception around them which discourage people from enrolling. Then in addition to that, a majority of these TVET colleges don't have proper infrastructure and modern facilities to deliver their courses and programs with high standards. And unfortunately, the state that a majority of them are in only helps to reinforce the negative stereotype around them. So there's also been proposals to have TVET institutions established in all the 47 counties to make them more accessible and for equity. Then another thing that the government has done to make sure that the skills of young people are relevant to the market is to review the courses offered by the universities. So about 2 years ago, universities were told to scrap some courses because they aren't relevant to the market. They were also given the responsibility to make sure that their students were employed after graduation. And if not, they should scrap the courses. Now I find this a bit laughable because one, it's the responsibility of the market and the economy to grow and to develop in order to absorb the talent and the graduates. The economy and the business environment should be friendly enough so that people can create jobs for themselves or businesses grow. So that's not the responsibility of universities. And at the same time, we cannot have everyone doing like business administration or computer science or the same courses just because that's what's on demand. Let me tell you, in developed economies, people specialize in things you couldn't even imagine that it's possible to specialize in, like being an expert in the sound of whales, ocean sounds. Then another example closer to home is we have a shortage of doctors and teachers. But is that to say that we don't need them? No. Is that to say that we should scrap off medicine and education? No. It just simply means that the economy isn't growing fast enough to meet the demand for those skills. But it doesn't mean that those skills are less important. And this cuts across the many professions where people are struggling to find jobs in this country. And to support my point, the report of unemployment in the 80s said that since it was difficult to find people with professional and technical skills in different fields, they had to rely on importing skills, basically getting expatriates to come with those specialized skills. And that's why many of these courses were introduced in the universities in preparation for when the need arises. So if we're scrapping off the highly specialized courses, yet we introduce them out of a real need so that we stop bringing in expatriates, is in that retrogression, moving backwards. Then the government defended themselves saying that universities needed to stay afloat because retaining the courses was becoming a burden financially. And I know desperate times call for desperate measures, but all this just speaks to a deeper problem, which is the governance of our economy. The economy hasn't been governed well for a long, long time, so the market won't develop as it should if it were governed well. I also heard Ruto mentioning that his government will provide online learning facilities to make education more accessible. And to that, I just say, let's wait and see. Now, finally, over the years, the government has been providing financing opportunities for students who want to pursue higher education. The most popular one is the HELB loan. They recently changed the funding model, so I won't dwell on this. But even HELB itself has run into its own problems. because for it to be sustainable, the beneficiaries must have a source of income to be able to pay back. I'll touch on this in one of the videos after this one. So in conclusion, we need to remember that at independence, Jomo Kenyatta said that the 3 things we need to work on as a country is poverty, disease, and ignorance. All that was great, very important, because we were preparing for the future. However, if we continue defying economic principles like we have and poorly governing the economy, we'll be perpetually preparing for the future without ever reaching there. So economic development inakuwa kama story za jaba. And by the way, you can educate people all you want, but if you don't follow economic principles, they will not be able to find jobs or to create sustainable jobs for themselves. It just is what it is. So in my next video, I'll discuss how the government addresses the demand side of unemployment. So stick around for that. If you can relate to this video or you enjoyed it, please leave a comment down below, give it a thumbs up, and share it within your circles. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.